I've been working on a fantasy short film that you'll be able to watch here on my channel really soon. I started it as a test for using Seedance 2.0 in 4K, and then while I was still working on it, 2.5 came out. So I got the opportunity to use 2.5 on a real short film project, giving me a good comparison between it and 2.0. Now, the biggest hesitation I had with 2.5 is that it's only launched at 720p, while I really wanted to render my short film in 4K. So the question I had to answer was, is it worth using 2.5 in only 720p and giving up 4K? That's what I'm going to cover in this video, and stick around to the end because I'll show you a technique I've used that lets you basically get the best of both worlds. So the big feature is that you can now generate up to 30 seconds in a single generation. References also got a huge upgrade, up to 50 on the new model, which is pretty insane. Prompt adherence is meant to be better as well, which I have found to be the case. And there's also some new editing modes, which we'll get into as well. The catch, as I said earlier, is the lower resolution. 1080p and 4K will likely come in the future, but right now we just have 480p and 720p to work with. A quick thanks to Higgsfield for sponsoring this video, and it's also where I've been building my short film, so that's what you'll be seeing throughout. Now you'll find a few options here. The first one is the regular 2.5, where you can add all of your references and use as an omni model, and also your typical start frame, end frame. The second one is 2.5 extend. This is one that I've used a lot. Generally, I'm just extending after a video, but it's actually really neat that you can extend before a video as well. I'll come back to why that's so useful in a little bit. And then the third option is 2.5 edit, where you upload a video, where you can isolate something specific in a video and just change that one thing without regenerating the whole clip. So let's do an example. We're gonna add in a video here, and I'm actually gonna go over to the draw feature. So the video is this man stopping, and then he runs off. Let's say that I wanna change his sword here. I'm actually gonna draw around the sword, replace the sword with the axe from the reference image. Do not change anything else. And then I can actually add a reference image here. Then just click generate. Now once that's generated, this is what we get. Okay, so we're now in Premiere, and I've just layered the new video clip on top of the old one so that we can play it back and see what's changed. So you can see that it's actually really, really good. There's a tiny little bit of change in a few frames here and there, but for the most part, all that's really changed is the sword into the axe, just like we asked for. So let's start with the thing that actually mattered most to me. There were shots in my film that I just couldn't quite get 2.0 to nail, and then I'd run the same prompt in 2.5 and it would understand what I was after. Here's an example. So in this shot, I wanted the goblin to jump over the little line of fire, land on the other side, raise his blade to swing, but then gets shocked by the woman and put down before he can get a swing off. 2.0 just couldn't seem to pull it off, but then I got this from the first take on 2.5. So I was really impressed here that 2.5 understood really what I wanted. Now, to be fair, the images that I gave it aren't really that great. They're a little bit too front on. It would have actually been staged better if the image was a little bit more side on so that you could understand what the line is between the characters. But nonetheless, 2.5 understood exactly what I wanted and just kind of like executed it first shot. To put a number on it, with 2.0, I was generally looking at maybe 4 or 5 attempts to get a shot that I was happy with, whereas I've found on 2.5, it was more like 2 or 3. So it's not absolutely perfect. It certainly doesn't one-shot everything, but I am finding like a noticeable bump up in prompt adherence and kind of getting what you actually want. The other thing that I noticed is that the acting performances just felt a little sharper or more nuanced in 2.5. I would run a prompt a few times over and over in 2.0 and get good performances, fairly similar between the generations, whereas 2.5 just sometimes would make little decisions and add little things that I just wasn't expecting. Not adding things as far as like going against my prompt, but just like nuanced little details that I thought were nice touches. And I've also found that 2.5 performances are allowed to breathe a little bit more. In a lot of video models, it's hard to get characters to just kind of stay still and kind of hold a beat. Instead, they just want to fill that space with doing something. Whereas 2.5 feels like it's quite good at allowing the moments to breathe, which is really nice.
You really don't know, do you?
Know what?
There was no necromantis at Aldermire.
You're lying. You'd say anything to save your neck.
So a few garbled words there, but overall, I'm really liking these more subtle performances that I've been seeing from 2.5. As far as audio goes, that's always been pretty solid. I've always liked that in 2.0, and then I think 2.5 has sounded really great as well. The only small complaint that I have is that in 2.0, I always add the text "no music" into my prompts, and that does it perfectly. There's never any music. Whereas that same prompt doesn't seem to have worked in 2.5, as you could hear in that take. There's always just this like really subtle music in the background. So I will have to kind of like strip that out if I want to use that dialogue. But I'm sure that if not already, someone will figure out the right phrasing or the right prompt to use to stop that happening. And if you know how to stop that happening, then just let me know in the comments below. It's not a huge issue, but it is like a minor grievance I've had on the audio side. The only other observation that I've had is that it likes to drop these big heavy hits at the start of a shot to like make everything seem really dramatic. Again, I'd prefer to not have any of that in the generations, and I'll add all of that in my own sound pass later on. All right, so 30-second generations. I think other than the prompt adherence, this is probably the part that had me the most excited to use 2.5 on my short film. Before this, I was finding my progress was really starting to slow down on the short film, especially as I was getting into some more complex scenes. So having a whole 20 to 30 second sequence at a time, I found actually gave the model more context to understand what was going on. Like it helped Seedance create each shot more accurately because it understood more about the shots that came before it and the shots that would come after. And there were just like little things that I found, like sometimes it would realize, oh, this one object or background needs to be shown in a later shot. So you're going to get a little glimpse of it just out of focus in this earlier shot. So just things like that. I just felt that the longer context of having a longer overall generation helped tie the consistency of everything together a little bit more. This was a generation that I thought was working really well, and I liked most of the shots. It all seemed very coherent. There was just a couple of little moments that weren't quite right, like when she wipes her nose, it's meant to wipe away the blood, but the blood is still there after she wipes with her hand. And then that final shot, the camera's meant to pan with her, and then she runs away from the camera, but instead she just kind of runs away from the camera in the wrong direction. So for the most part, really good, but still not absolutely perfect every time.
Get inside!
So that's another generation where I liked a lot of what it was doing, but it wasn't absolutely perfect. Most of the chase sequence was pretty cool. A little bit of awkward running from him. Her calling out his name, which is Rook, comes out all jarbled, but to be fair, it is a bit of an unusual name, so I'll kind of have to like fix that one separately. Then the only other shot that didn't really work was when the little farmer family is kind of running inside. The man kind of runs off in a weird direction instead of running towards the door like prompted. Now, while I do like having up to 30 seconds, I was also sort of cautious about it to begin with, because depending on the sequence that you've written or built out, if it gets one of your earlier shots wrong, that could potentially make every other shot after that unusable. That's something to keep in mind if you're considering using the whole 30 seconds. All right, so she's chasing him. This part's good, and then he runs through the fence. He's meant to be running around it. That's meant to hit the gate. He's meant to be outside of the gate.
Rook, stop!
He touches it, it's hot, which is great, except he's on the wrong side, but then he jumps the fence, which he's meant to jump into the pen, which he was already in. And then that last shot there is meant to be her jumping the stone wall, but for some reason it defaulted to him. So Seedance 2.5 is probably the best model out there currently, but it's still far from perfect. You still get misfires and you still get frustrated when you have a take that is completely unusable and you've just lost $4 or $5 on that generation. But ultimately that is part of this, and every generation is not going to be perfect. That literally is just kind of part of this game, unfortunately. You can look at a bad take and you can see, is there something I could improve with my prompting? Was it me? Could I tweak anything or make it clearer? Or can I figure out why this guy ran through the fence? What did I write, and can I tweak the writing? So there is definitely a part of it which is you prompting, but you also just have to understand that you're gonna get a lot of misfires, so you just have to account for that. The good thing is that if you mostly get what you want and there's just one or two little moments or shots that you don't like, you don't have to rerun the entire generation. You can just prompt now for that one shot that you still need. And so whilst I did use this quite a bit, I typically wouldn't even use the whole 30 seconds all the time. I'd often use between 20 to 26 seconds or something like that. But this is also where the extend feature comes back in, because as I mentioned, you can actually extend before a video as well as after. So for example, let's say that you did a 30-second generation and the very first shot didn't work properly, but you wanted to keep the rest of it. So you could actually use that latter part as an input and just basically regenerate the first shot in the sequence, telling it to extend from the following clip, so that you then generate a shot that then is cohesive with everything else that you've created. All right, so let's talk about references. 2.5 gives you 50 in total, 30 images, 10 videos, and 10 audio, which to be honest is absolutely insane. And I don't really have any idea when you would use that, or at least when I would use that, but it's really great to have that many if you need them. On my short film using 2.0, I would generally use up to 7 to 9 images. There were a handful of shots where I actually wanted a couple more images. I wanted 11, but I could only use 9. But it wasn't really a big deal because I could easily get away with getting rid of a couple of references that were probably unnecessary for that shot anyway. Like there were smaller character details that were probably not going to show up in my generations. So the number of image references didn't really worry me too much. However, the allotment of video references is actually a really big plus for me personally on 2.5. So on 2.0, your video references combined can't surpass 15 seconds total. And that was a real constraint for me. What I was doing a lot of was just generating a depth map video that was maybe 9 to 12 seconds. And then I'd edit together a 3 to 6 second reference video for the generation to follow on from. So I couldn't give it a 15-second depth map and give it up to a 15-second video reference to follow on from. But my point more so is that 2.5 doesn't have that limitation. You can feed it a lot more. You've now got 30 seconds to play with, so you can give it a lot more video context and a lot more numbers of videos if you choose, which I really love. So that brings us to talk about resolution. As I mentioned, that was my biggest hang up on using 2.5 in its current launch state. But I have actually been pleasantly surprised about how good some of the 720p shots looked. And rather than doing that whole depth map process that I told you, there have actually just been a number of clips that I just upscaled to 4K from 720p and used that as the final shot in my short film using Topaz Starlight Precise, which I find to be kind of the best model to upscale and maintain a lot of detail. Now, I certainly couldn't do that with everything that's 720p. As a rule of thumb, I've found that wider shots fall apart way too much, but close-ups are are the main ones where I've found that they can be upscaled and still look really good. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's a way to get the best of both worlds, the way to get the prompt adherence of 720p, but then kind of get the quality of the 2.0 4K. And it's what I've already mentioned, and it's that depth map technique. So what you can do is if you've got a prompt that 2.0 is struggling to create, you can use 2.5 to create it and make the most of basically how smart 2.5 is and how good the prompt adherence is. And you can usually do this in 480p because all you're really capturing is the motion and the blocking, which means you can run it over and over a lot cheaper to find the take that you want. And then once I've got the generation that I want, or I've edited together the generation that I want from multiple takes, I'll then turn that into a depth map video, take that, feed that back into Seedance to generate it at 4K. And then generally speaking, I would get the generation that I actually want in one generation or maybe two without kind of rolling the dice on Seedance 4K over and over and over, hoping to get what I am after. But the depth map video doesn't give the model any idea about what things look like. So you either have to feed it reference images or start frames, etc., audio clips as a voice reference, and then you could use up to your full 15 seconds as a depth map video, or give it video to continue on from, which is what I'd like to do because I could, take the last few clips that have worked really well, make sure that I've included a wide shot so it's got plenty of a reference for the geography as well as things like the voices of the character. The main limitation that I've already mentioned is that Seedance 2.0 limits you to 15 seconds of video reference. So while you can generate a rehearsal in 2.5 up to 30 seconds, you would then have to break that down into smaller 10 to 15 second sections to render out in 4K with the same prompt, but then ultimately end up with the best of both worlds. Now onto cost, because price-wise, 2.5 is definitely more expensive than 2.0, and 2.0 was already an expensive model. So here on Higgsfield, it's 68 credits for Seedance 2.0 at 720p, 15 seconds, and then 98 credits for 2.5 at 720p, 15 seconds. So that's about 44% more expensive. However, one thing to note is that you can often get a generation a little bit cheaper when you're using video references. So for example, if I add a video reference here, it actually goes from 98 credits down to 60, which is actually cheaper currently than using Seedance 2.0, which is actually pretty cool. So of course there's an advantage here to adding a video reference to your prompts, but you want to make sure that it actually has a use in your generation, because otherwise if you're just adding a video for the sake of adding it, then you could potentially mess up your generation. And now, even though 2.5 is more expensive, take into consideration what I mentioned before, where in my experience, 2.0 might take me 4 or 5 attempts and 2.5 might only take me 2 or 3 attempts to get what I'm after. So even though it's more expensive, it may work out the same price or possibly even cheaper per finished shot, depending on the complexity of what you're prompting for. That's definitely just something you're going to have to do the math on yourself and, try out with your own prompts and your own projects. Okay, so the big question, is it worth it? I think I can conclusively say that the model itself is better than 2.0. Prompt adherence, performances, 30-second generations, the increased references that you can attach. But the downsides, of course, is that you do only have it at 720p and it's more expensive. So the question isn't really about whether it's better or not, it's about which trade-off do you want to make on this particular shot. So here's where I've landed personally at this point. I'm going to continue using 2.0 as much as possible, especially because of the higher resolutions. And then I'm just going to utilize 2.5 when I've got a more complex sequence that 2.0 can't seem to nail, or if I just want to cover a lot more ground in one 30-second generation, or if I think that the shots within that sequence would benefit from being part of a 30-second generation rather than doing smaller increments. I'm going to kind of use it as a tool when I need it. It's still early days though, of course, so I'm excited to keep playing with the model. And when 1080p and 4K do come out, I do think hands down it's going to be the best model out there. However, you're still going to probably be faced with the question on whether you need it for every single shot or whether it's overkill and you still just utilize Seedance 2.0 or even other video models out there. Watch my channel for the full release of my fantasy short film in the coming days, and then shortly after that, a full breakdown of my entire Seedance filmmaking workflow. And if you want to try out Higgsfield for yourself, click the link in the description. Thanks for watching.